We're delighted to be joined now, very important lady, senior political commentator at the Telegraph, Annabel Denham. Good morning.
Good morning, Jeremy.
Is that a have we had a promotion here? Senior political commentator? Is that just a promotion, isn't it?
A change in job title.
Well, it sounds.
We put it.
It sounds very, very good. I'm actually going to take issue with your article today. Starmer's successors will prove just as clueless as him. Now, I accept that the makeup of the front bench is at best pretty appalling. But I do seriously, on the back of this Mandelson stuff, question an awful lot about this man's integrity. And I think I'm actually past joking about it. If he knew an nth of anything about Mandelson, be it through his security services or people in America who apparently had concerns, and he did nothing about it, I think he's complicit in this, Annabel. But further than that, if he uses the old adage of, I didn't know, he has to go down. I mean, we all experienced Boris Johnson in the end. This man is a duplicitous, incompetent git. I can't have it. And I add to the mix very quickly, if he is part of a bigger issue, how much has Mandelson got on so many members of the Labour Party?
Well, OK, Jeremy, there's a lot to unpack there. First, the point that I was making in my article really is that Starmer's fundamental problem was that he came into government with a plan. He thought that the hard part, like Boris Johnson before him, was winning the election. And then once he entered number 10, he had absolutely no idea what he was doing, which is why he's been buffeted by events and lurched from one crisis to another. It's also the reason why he's failed to set out any kind of vision and thus struggled to manage his enormous parliamentary party in the way that Tony Blair was able to. And my sense is that none of the likely successors will be any more successful in this regard. I don't get any feeling that Angela Rayner is there setting out in great detail and testing to destruction a set of policies that she would like to implement were she to become our Prime Minister. And I think the same applies to Andy Burnham, who, let's not forget, has been on quite the political journey since he was a Blairite cabinet minister. I've
got to say very quickly, I completely agree with you, and I wasn't getting it in the wrong context. I completely agree. No vision, no plan, buffeted left and right. I'm not sticking up for anybody, but I think Starmer is pretty mired in this stuff. I really do.
Well, I mean, goodness knows what's happening with the crisis comms at number 10 at the moment. They must be in a state of total panic. Look, in true Starmer form, he was too late to really grasp how serious this crisis was until after it had detonated. So at the start of the week, he was dragging his feet and he wanted to go through due process and didn't even want to discuss stripping Mandelson of his peerage until Tuesday afternoon. I mean, that was clearly too late. Why they didn't act with more alacrity is baffling. And once again, the Prime Minister looks as though he's been bounced into taking tough action rather than being on the front foot. And they will now, Downing Street, be absolutely desperate to distance Keir Starmer from this scandal in any way that they possibly can. I wonder if there's actually a third way to the two options that you set out, which is that Starmer will say that it may have passed his desk, but he didn't see it. Because if the security services weren't disclosing these documents, then what exactly were they doing? But no, the screws are only going to tighten on the Prime Minister over what he knew and when, and bring your popcorn to PM's Q's today, because I expect Kemi Badenoch to give a pretty good showing and land quite a few blows.
I agree with you, but if he dares to say it passed my desk, the obvious question back to him is, but hold on a second, the security services told you in no uncertain terms that allowing the Chinese super embassy was a dangerous and wrong decision. They pointed that out. He ignored that advice, disappeared off to China for a trade deal because his policies have destroyed the economy, certainly for small businesses, which leads many to believe, right, that he might well have ignored this advice. But I bring it back to, and I'm not a conspiracy theorist in any way, Annabel, you know that, but it does just ask, how has a man in Mandelson disgracefully resigned on at least 3 occasions and be brought back again and again, overnight, by the way, you'll know this, people might not tuning in, Gordon Brown, who I'd never agree with, to be honest, politically, but I do believe there was some integrity there, has contacted the police himself and said, this is absolutely appalling. This was my government. I do not want you to allow Number 10 to cover it up. That's a Labour grandee saying this. I wonder, genuinely wonder, how much Mandelson has got. And if he does go down, here's the big question from Rob in Newcastle. Is he going to squeal, do you think?
Well, on Gordon Brown, obviously he has been dragged into this because in the late 2000s he gave Mandy the life peerage, which enabled him to become our business secretary, to re-enter government. So I can sort of understand why Gordon Brown made that decision. One thing I would just say about Peter Mandelson is that actually he's made a lot of the right calls over the years. You talked about China. He has been a China skeptic. He's been extremely cautious about the increasing power of Beijing and has warned successive Labour governments, or rather the Labour Party, his colleagues, to be, to not be reckless in that regard. And he's been more on the let's decouple and de-risk side of the fence. And the same applies to the EU. He's warned about the EU only having us back as supplicants and talked about how we'd have to pay a huge price.
But Annabel, I'm just
going to say that he has made some of the big calls.
I don't think that has any. I don't think that anybody is going to give and I'm being completely straight with mates, a toss about that anymore. This man has abused his position, abused his contacts. If this is true, the most disgusting thing you can do in public office, all while parading his friendship with a convicted paedophile, not a mention of victims. And yesterday, I don't know if you will have seen this, you see everything more than I do, but to come out on television and go, I didn't really know the extent of the sexual activity of Epstein because I'm a gay man, I thought was probably the lowest of the low. And I won't give you an analogy, but there's a certain person who was in trouble some months ago from, let's just say, the public eye, who played the same card. I don't think that's good enough, right? I don't think it's good enough. And he might well have been right on certain issues, but I think he is, to many people who've contacted the show this morning, Annabel, they'd say he is symptomatic of the entitled, arrogant, privileged class who don't give a toss about the very people they're supposed to represent. And I think that's the real issue for Labour and Mandelson right now.
No, I agree. And I think, public trust in politics and politicians is at an all-time low. And the last thing we need is for somebody, who was a Labour grandee to be eroding it even further. And let's not forget that all of this is contested, but I nevertheless support the fact that there is going to be a police investigation into whether there was misconduct in public office. And that's extremely important that we get to the bottom of this. Keir Starmer and I actually agree on that, and him saying that passing on state secrets would be unacceptable. Of course it is. It absolutely stinks. And the fact that it was Jeffrey Epstein, who at this point had been convicted of paedophilia, just makes it all the more grubby and sordid. And no wonder the public are outraged. And I'll tell you, it isn't just the public, Jeremy, it's also the Parliamentary Labour Party. Yeah. Keir Starmer is in seriously hot water here. He needs to be seen, I think, publicly to be burying Peter Mandelson if he's to have any hope of surviving it. But even if he does, he's just living to see another day. Gorton and Denham by-election that Labour could well lose to the Green Party. Yeah. No, party that wants to liberalise drugs, but whose leader is apparently a teetotaler. And then you've got the forthcoming bloodbath of the May elections. So no, things are not looking good for Keir Starmer, and they're not looking good for Morgan McSweeney, his chief of staff either, who railroaded through the appointment of Peter Mandelson. They have a long-standing...
Yeah, I think you're right. McSweeney is definitely... we talked about this the other week. He was seen going through the back door to Number 10, wasn't he, Mandelson, when the last cabinet reshuffle was on, because apparently he's still got the ear of McSweeney. So much on the front page of the Telegraph, and your article as well, which is utterly brilliant. I just wanted to... I wanted to ask you a question to spread the Epstein thing out to our royal family. Andrew, sordid as hell, removed from Royal Lodge overnight on Monday, sent packing to Norfolk, but still privileged. I think the clamour for him to either be banished or leave this country, or maybe even jail. We'll gather there's allegations overnight of further sex trafficking and payments to strippers. I'm going to ask you a question that was put to me earlier, and I'm a fervent royalist. I said I was delighted that our late Queen wasn't around to experience this, and somebody very quickly texted me and went, what did she think the 12 million quid was for then? What's your response to that?
Well, you know, it has been a stain on the King's monarchy reign in a way that perhaps it wasn't his late mother's. And, you know, I feel quite a depth of sympathy for him in that regard. And I suspect that he took the very drastic, near unprecedented action that he did last year in stripping Andrew of all of his baubles and booting him out of Windsor in order to preserve his son William's reign, so that it wouldn't be tainted in the same way. You know, the 12 million, we don't know, do we? Ultimately, that settlement was made and the case went away, but only temporarily. You know, I just wonder for Andrew how much longer this is going to drag on and on.
I don't think it's going to go away.
You and I, no, I don't think it's going to go away. Obviously, you've had this trove that was released on Friday that journalists are picking their way through. And you and I may not agree with this again, but I find it slightly ghoulish, the kind of pitchfork crowd piling onto Prince Andrew, or artist formerly known as Prince Andrew, in the way that they have. You know, he hasn't been charged, let alone convicted, of any crime in UK law. And I think...
Not yet. I tell you what I'd say,
Jeremy, but it's innocent until proven guilty.
No, I get that.
I can see why people find him odious.
People will think that you and I are arguing. We're not. We're debating. I would say this, and I genuinely mean this, and I've been in the eye of the media storm, and that's what comes when you're in the public eye. If you have had a life of privilege and entitlement, and you put that into where I think we are as a country, I go back to this silent majority have woken up and are no longer prepared to trust bent politicians or be treated as second-class citizens to migrants. And I think this is why it's a very important moment for the British royal family, Annabel. I think people in their millions are now going, hold on a minute, mate. You did all of that under the cover of darkness and you got away with it for years. What about the victims? Because nothing, apart from out of Prince Edward's mouth, has come from... And I'm a royalist, Annabel, like you wouldn't believe. The old man, everybody knows this, worked for the royal family for 41 years. But not a mention, apart from Prince Edward the other day, about the victims of the paedophile that was Jeffrey Epstein. And of course, Andrew isn't guilty until proven that way. But his sordid, entitled lifestyle, I think, has finally come back to bite him on the arse, and I don't think he can moan about that. But I think the royal family, unfortunately, I agree with Andrew Loney, and I didn't think I would. I think they're going to have to tell us the truth about how much they knew and when they knew it.
Well, look, I completely agree with you about the victims. They're at the heart of this, and one can only imagine how frustrated they must feel that more heads haven't rolled, that the only person who is behind bars as a consequence of this scandal is Ghislaine Maxwell. I slightly dispute some of the things that you've said about Andrew's upbringing in a way, because I think he had an extremely dysfunctional childhood. You know, it was far from wholesome, even though he may have been the Queen's favourite. He was born not to reign, but ultimately to be the perennial understudy. And when William was born, you know, he sort of kicked to one side. And we celebrated him for such a long time. We lifted him up and we joked about how he was Randy Andy. And then a few decades later, our society, we had Me Too and everything fundamentally changed. And now we're looking back on his behaviour then through a different lens. And don't get me wrong, you know, the idea that he was 50 and sleeping with somebody in their mid-20s, I find pretty revolting. But he hasn't actually done anything illegal. And I just think a lot of people are making judgments based on second-hand, third-hand opinions of Andrew.
I think that's right, but I tell you what I also think. I don't think it's going to get any easier, and I think there must be a shed load more. And I guess I'm talking from the point of view of the monarchy in its entirety. You know, I mean, I said something yesterday that Kinsey Schofield rightly picked me up on. I said I felt sorry for those two young princesses dragged to see a paedophile by their mother. Turns out they were 18 and 20. Well, my kids at 18 and 20 would know what a paedophile is and wouldn't have wanted to come and visit them. So, you know, maybe they are. I just think there's a whole series of things that the royal family are going to have to answer, a whole series of things that the Labour Party are going to have to answer. And just to finish, I don't know your stance personally on this, but marvel's the wrong word. It makes me shudder when I think of the tentacles in the fingers that Epstein had in so many different pies. It's beyond me. Prime ministers, presidents, some of the biggest businessmen in the world. I mean, this guy, over the weekend there was this sort of conspiracy theory that he was a front man for the KGB or for Mossad because that would have financed his lifestyle. But his power over these people was extraordinary, Annabel, wasn't it?
Yes, I mean, it was immense. And I don't think we're entirely clear where exactly his money came from and how he made it. And why is it that he had this hold over these extraordinarily important senior figures across sort of business and royals and politics and so on, which is the reason why, you know, many millions of column inches have been devoted to this man, why books have been written about him. There was a Netflix TV show. And I think now, you know, again, I don't want to sound like a conspiracy theorist here, but are there remaining questions to be asked about the nature of his death as well?
Yeah, couldn't agree more. Annabel Denham, really good to have you on. Senior, just repeat the new title.
Senior political commentator
at the Daily Telegraph. Thank you very much indeed. Great to have you on. 9:20.